we think about navigating the shift from office to remote work, it's really interesting at times that we're living in right now, right? We have, our world is changing. We have so many global issues and things going on, and it's really affecting our day-to-day and normal, quote unquote, normal working patterns. And so I'm just really excited to share a little bit about how we as Microsoft are helping our customers, how we are dealing with all of this change, and hoping that by sharing these stories with you, that you will also get some good insights, maybe some good ideas of things that you can apply to your own organizations. And so with that, when we think about how companies are successful, or what separates organizations apart, and really what separates high performing organizations from the rest. And so when we think about that question, and we as an organization inside of Microsoft have thought about that question quite a bit. And to answer this question, McKinsey studied 2,000 organizations over a 10-year period. And what's interesting is that rather than diving into financial or operational metrics, they first evaluated how people work together to achieve business outcomes. And so with that, they analyzed 5 million data points to describe the way work gets done, and then assigned an organizational health score to those companies. And what they found was across organizations, across industries, companies with the strongest organizational health also drove the strongest financial and operational performance, achieving 3 times the total shareholder returns and 2.5 times the return on invested capital than those scoring in the bottom tier. And so in other words, the way that people work really matters and is a driver of overall success. And so when we think about that today, especially in the world that we live in today, how can we understand better about the way people work in order to keep businesses thriving and keep businesses continuing in this ever-changing climate? And so if we know that higher organizational health scores correlate to better financial and operational metrics, how do companies uncover where things are going well and where there's an improvement necessary? You as leaders, you have hunches, or you have another word for hunches is you have a way of, you think that something is maybe happening, but you don't really have the data to be able to prove that hunch. And so if you don't have the data to prove what you think you're experiencing in the organization, it's really hard to fix those problems. And so going forward, if you think about, having these different hunches and trying to find the data to prove what you're thinking is going on in the organization so that you can fix things or uncover places where good things are happening and you want more good things to happen across the organization, that's where I wanted to share this story with you around a notion called bright spots. So Chip and Dan Heath, you should write down their names. It's a really good book called Switch, where it's a book about organizational change, and they explain this concept of bright spots, where they talk about a story that originated in Vietnam. And I'll tell you very briefly this story because I think it really applies to organizations and how we can look at organizational change. So in 1990, the Vietnamese government was really struggling with malnourished children. The Vietnamese government allowed a guy named Jerry Sternin from a nonprofit organization called Save the Children to enter the country to help. And so Sternin went to the country with his wife and 10-year-old son. They could not speak the language. They had very minimal staff and meager resources. And the idea was malnutrition was a result of a lot of problems that were all intertwined. Sanitation was poor, poverty was nearly universal, clean water was not readily available, and the rural people tended to be ignorant about nutrition. This was all true, but this doesn't help to fix the problem of malnutrition, because if you have to fix all of those systemic issues, then you're never going to help these kids that are malnourished, and especially within a 6-month period of time with virtually no money. And so instead of sitting around and thinking about the problem, he decided to take action. He went to the village, he got mothers to help him, and he asked every mother to go out and measure all the children in the village. And the mothers came back with interesting data. They came back with some children were measured as being normal size and weight, even though all children in the village were all poor, and for everybody sanitation was poor. And so with this, he realized that there was something that was happening in some different families versus others, such that some of these children were nourished while others were not. And so what he called this was bright spots. There are areas within this village that some families are doing something different, and it's something different that all families should be doing. And so what he found out was, he said, okay, now go back to those families and shadow them. Find out what they're doing that's different and that's positive and that is helping these children. And so there were like 4 key insights that these families, these so-called bright spot families, did differently than all the other families. Number 1, instead of eating 2 meals a day, the bright spot families were feeding their kids 4 times a day. So the same amount of food, but broken up into 4 meals, because when a child has a malnourished stomach, it's harder for them to digest larger meals. And so breaking it down into 4 smaller meals allows them to digest it better, to absorb the nutrients, and therefore be more nourished and healthy. Number 2, normally kids would eat from what's called a communal bowl. And so these bright spots parents were feeding their children very actively, making sure that they ate enough and ate their portion, and even encouraged the children to eat when they were sick, which was not the norm. The third insight is that the bright spot parents packaged seafood protein, such as shrimps and crabs, that the parents found on the rice paddies that they worked on. This was normally viewed as not being appropriate for children, but these bright spot parents did it anyway. And it was also serving as a great source of nutrition. And the fourth insight was that sweet potato greens were considered a low-class food, but it grew everywhere in Vietnam. And so these families were also picking these sweet potato greens and adding it to the food that they had allocated to them. And so these are really 4 actionable insights that an outsider that was not in Vietnam witnessing this would ever know about. And so the solution was very much native, in that these things were already happening inside of this village, and they just needed to be uncovered so that everybody else could learn how to do it. But they also needed to be taught by their own people, and so that this would really become a habit. And so that's what Jerry Sternin did. He asked all of these families to group up together so that they could learn how to cook and learn these new behaviors together, so that these families, all families in the village, could then start to use these new behaviors and these new practices. And so they continued to do this, and after 6 months, 65% of the village's children were better nourished and stayed that way. And an independent study was done afterward, and they found that even children who had not been born yet when this happened were as healthy as the children were when Jerry Sternin left. And this provided proof that this transformation, that these changes had stuck, and that success had begun to spread. And once the idea scaled, the program reached 2.2 million people in 265 villages in Vietnam by finding the bright spots, by focusing on great things that work and replicating them. And so why did I tell you this story? I told you this story because we deal with large scale issues in our organizations every day, be it a sudden shift from office work to remote work, culture transformation, employee engagement issues, attrition, skills, talent. Companies spend a lot of time and money analyzing these issues and are often frustrated by the results that they get. And so really finding your bright spots in your organizations with the data that's already there is so valuable and important for creating wide scale change. And so if we think about that story and we apply it to our organizations, you know, how do we find out from our own people what's working well and what they're doing in order to make a positive impact to business outcomes, right? How do you measure the day-to-day actions that all your people do to get you to those outcomes? How do you measure how their time is used, how they communicate with other people and share information, how they function as organizations across different lines of business and geographies, how business processes affect decision making, innovation cycles, and speed to market? It's all of these ways of working that describe what your business really looks like. And so it paints a picture of how your organization creates value and how the day-to-day actions of every one of the people in your organization impact those business outcomes. So how do we measure that? We have a solution that allows us to aggregate all of these passive, what we call passive behavioral data signals that are happening every day in Office 365. We have a way to aggregate and de-identify all of those signals so that you can have insight as a leader into the way work gets done at an aggregate level, so that you can predict the impact of these day-to-day actions on your business outcomes. And we'll talk more specifically about what we're dealing with right now with COVID and this remote work situation, and you know, going back to the office, which is a lot of things that a lot of companies are thinking about right now, and how these passive behavioral data signals can help give you some clarity and direction on how you can navigate this situation. And so if you think about also not only the current situation of remote work and back to work, or excuse me, back to office, because we've all been working like crazy, but also other things that you already had on your agenda, like transformation initiatives and all of these other things that you're driving. How can you do that if you don't have the data to support whatever hypothesis you have that you want to change? And we know from experience that once our customers use this behavioral data set and really embed this solution into their everyday lives, it becomes part of their DNA for continuous learning and optimization and improvement of the way that their organizations work. And so the solution is called Workplace Analytics. And with Workplace Analytics, um, you're really taking that rich behavioral data set and you're able to apply it to these types of use cases. And so just to give you some examples of how we use all of these, you know, millions of data signals to be able to help you as leaders understand, you know, how expensive are some of my business processes that I may not even know how expensive they are. You know, how is my meeting culture slowing down our decision-making ability? How is our current onboarding program maybe being successful in keeping the right talent, or is it causing us to lose great talent that took us a long time to recruit? And then on the you know, customer focus side, what can we do to ensure that all of our salespeople, as an example, sell like all of our top performers do? What do our top performing salespeople do differently than the ones who are not top performer? So these are examples of things that you can get answers to with this data set, which is super, super exciting. And the kind of fourth pillar, if you will, which is not listed here because it's emerged as well in the last few months for us as an organization, is something that we like to call organizational resilience. And it's really measuring the impact of this kind of rapid shift to remote work. If you think about it, we went from a visible to an invisible workforce overnight, right? And so for a lot of leaders and organizations, that's a very scary situation to be in when you're not prepared for it. When you're not prepared from a technical and technical infrastructure standpoint, as well as not being prepared for it from a people management standpoint. And so in this org resilience topic, we tried to think about what were the questions that all of these leaders and CEOs are asking themselves right now in this particular situation, and how can we answer those questions with data. And so some of the top line questions that our customers were asking us for answers on are, how are collaboration activities changing? Now that everybody's working from home, are people still able to collaborate and work together in this new digital only world? And what are the impacts of the work-life integration now? It's not work-life balance, it's work-life integration. And as a company, are you able to maintain external relationships with your partners and customers and suppliers? And are employees still engaged and connected? How are work patterns evolving over time? So we've been in this remote work kind of work from home order for several months now. What are the trend lines looking like? And how can work effectiveness be improved? So we've put all of these things together to help our customers get a first view of what these patterns may look like. And this will also give you an idea of what these aggregated behavioral data signals can tell us about our organization. And so I'm just going to switch to a demo to show you kind of how we have approached answering these questions with data. And before I do that, I just want to pause and just check to see if there are any questions or any comments that you'd like to share before I go into the demo. Okay, and just checking to see you can still see my screen.
Yep, we can see your screen. I'll let you know if there's any questions in the chat or if anyone's raised their hand.
Great, great. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
So if we look at, so what I'm showing you now is I'm showing you basically how we as a company are helping our customers right now with all of these data signals. So as you can imagine, there are hundreds, there's I think 150 million people that have Office 365 and all of this Office graph data that is in the cloud can be aggregated and insights can be surfaced. And so, and this can really help us to give leaders insight into how all of our, people are reacting to all this change that's happening, and really give them insights to help their employees to understand, how they can do their best work even under these unprecedented circumstances. And so if you remember from my slide that I just showed you, these were basically the 6 questions that were on there. And I'll show you the data that we're trying to answer with that. Before we get into the actual dashboards, I just want to show you how I'm scoping this. So this is just an example. This is a demo data set. And what you can do is you can basically set the baseline period for before the disruption, and then you can select a period after the disruption to compare to. So my baseline period is from January until the end of February, and my current time period to measure against is March 7th to April 25th. And in this particular case, we're looking at a measured employee a group of 352 employees, and you'll see that there's no identifying information about these employees. It's all at an aggregate level, and we'll show it in looking at it from an organizational cut. Okay, so if we take the first one. Now you're a leader of your organization. Imagine, this is your organization that we're looking at. And what I'm showing you here is how are collaboration activities changing? So if you think about before the disruption and after the disruption, these are the time periods that I put in the settings. And we're looking at what's called weekly collaboration hours. And what that means is collaboration hours means the time I spend with other people. So whether I am chatting with other people in Microsoft Teams, whether I am emailing other people, or whether I am in a meeting or in a phone call. So that's what collaboration means, is doing something with somebody else. And the opposite of that is called focus time. Focus time is when I'm focusing and I'm not collaborating with anybody. I'm not in a meeting with anyone. I'm not doing email or instant message. Okay, so just as definitions. What you're looking at here is before the disruption happened, 17.8 hours were spent per person a week on collaboration. So meaning in emails, IMs, and meetings and calls. And then now it's increased by 26% to 22.4 hours. And then here you see the channel breakdown of how much time is spent in each channel. And the interesting thing here is, you know, when we first show this first view, leaders are usually very relieved to see that their organizations are able to continue working and are working, and even there is an uptick. I would expect an uptick because we've moved everything from being in the office, which is a combination of online and offline signals, if you will, to everything being an online digital signal. And so I would expect this to increase. You can also see on the right-hand side here in which organization the collaboration hours changed, either positive or negative. And this matters because you may see a really large increase, like here in HR, for example, and that may be normal for your organization, but it may also raise questions as to why there is such a large increase in collaboration for HR or engineering. It really depends on your own organization. So now, after seeing kind of this first view of knowing, okay, my people are able to continue working, right? They have, you know, laptops, they have the connectivity to the network, and they're able to continue. That looks great. And there's even an uptick. So a lot of organizations were worried about whether their people would continue working. And at this aggregate level, you can see, yes, people are absolutely continuing to work and are able to work. The next thing that we're looking at here is what are the impacts of work-life integration? And what we look at here is collaboration time and work week span, and I'll explain both. So what you see here is the percentage of employees whose collaboration hours have either increased or decreased by more than 4 hours per week. So let's break it down. On the right side, we see for this particular customer example, which is a demo data set, 49% of the employees had an increase of at least 4 hours per week in collaboration time. And then here, you can see the breakdown of each organization and what their increase was. Same here, here is the decrease and the breakdown of the decrease. Now, the reason why we put in each organization's increase or decrease is because averages could potentially obscure outliers, right? So areas where organizations have a disproportionate impact to these changes. So if you think about engineering, for example, let me just change this to 8 hours, and I'll tell you why this is so important. What you're looking at here is that this is the percentage of employees whose collaboration hours have increased by more than 8 hours per week. These are these guys on this side. And what you're seeing here is that, for example, the executive leadership team, 38% of the executive leadership team's collaboration has increased by a full workday. That is really a huge increase in collaboration within a team. If you're spending an entire 8-hour workday in addition to what you were working before, collaborating with your team. So this would be an area where a leader needs to go in and say, okay, what is going on? Why is this team disproportionately impacted? What can I do to help? And it says it right here why it matters. Shifting to remote work may impact specific groups more than others. And what we found through our own analysis at Microsoft, by looking at our own data just like this for our own organization, we found that regular manager check-ins reduced these kind of disproportionate impacts of remote work by up to 50%, meaning because our managers had regular check-ins with their people, they were able to ensure that the workload um, was distributed properly so that you didn't see these big spikes in the different organizations. So the key takeaway there is that having a regular manager check-in right now at this particular time of where we're at in the world is super important, not only to check in on how your employees are doing, but also to ensure that the workload is still manageable. So the interesting thing about this one is, as opposed to the first one I showed you, is that on the first dashboard, leaders are usually relieved to see that everybody's working and everybody is doing fine. On this dashboard, depending on what the numbers are, leaders start to get worried that their organizations may be burning out. And this is why we surface these insights, is to really help leaders understand where there might be places where they need to make some changes. Workweek span on the right is an indication here of how long your work week is. So if you wake up in the morning at 6 a.m. and you look at your phone and you send an email, that's the start of your workday. And if the last email that you sent was at 11 p.m. and you average that out over 5 work days, that is your work week span. And so here what we're seeing is how the work week span has increased or decreased, in this case by 4 hours per week. And so 42% of the employees have an increase of at least 4 hours. And again, here you can see different outliers of different organizations who may have an even longer work week span than others. Again, a place where a leader can go in and check what is going on. Is there some adjustments to our cultural norms or the way that people respond, when they respond, what the expectations are in terms of, you know, when people need to respond to emails. It's a conversation that leaders can have with their people to make sure that expectations are clear and that people can really somehow integrate their life with their work a bit better. The next one that we look at is all about after hours activity. So again, we're still under the answering the question of what the impacts of work-life integration are. And what you can see here on the left side is after hours activity. So the percentage of employees whose after hours have increased or decreased by more than 2 hours per week. And you can see that 17% of the entire population has increased by at least 2 hours a week. And again, here you see certain outliers like the exec leadership team, marketing, or legal, who have much higher spikes in terms of the number of people in their organization that have worked for 2 hours or more in after hours. But look at this, there is also even a population of folks in the legal team that have increased their work hours after hours by 4 hours per week. That's a big uptick. And this is also, again, something that leaders need to watch out for, because this is where people can burn out. And this is why it's just so important to see these insights. And so here you see the spread of activity across the day. So you see within an 8 to 5 time period, baseline compared to the current time period of how the activity has increased within working hours, as well as how the activity is increased outside of working hours. And if you look at here, for example, the instant messages sent with Microsoft Teams, in this example, it's 104% outside of the 8 to 5 period. I can tell you with Microsoft that our number of IMs sent outside of working hours is extremely high since the sudden shift. And it's just because everybody is super busy throughout their normal working day and has to take the time outside of the 8 to 5 time period to catch up on instant messages. And so we're all feeling, you know, the impact of this rapid change as well. Not only our customers, but Microsoft as well. And so this gives you kind of indications of, you know, how things are going. The other thing that's really interesting to remember when you look at these dashboards as well, if you think about the bright spot story that I told you earlier, if you don't see a really big increase or decrease where, organizations might be a bit more stable, if you will, or not much change, that may be an indication of a bright spot team, where you can go to that team and just understand from them, why isn't the impact as strong as the others, and learn from that team and use that as well as your best practices to help other teams adjust to these new norms as well. The next one that we look at is external relationships. So as any company during this time of change and rapid shifts, every company wants to make sure that they stay in business and that their business continues and that their business thrives. And a good indication of knowing if that's really the case is your external relationship numbers. And here what we're seeing is, based on the time period that I chose to compare, there is no increase, percentage increase in the email hours with external recipients. And again, external means customers, partners, and suppliers. But there is an increase of 27% in the meeting hours. And so what we do is we look at all the external domains that are different than your domain. We exclude any personal domains or things like hotmail.com or something like that, to be able to determine this number. But this will just give you, as a leader, a high-level indication of how your organizations are still connected to external parties. And then here we look at it in absolute numbers of hours per week per person, where the change in collaboration hours is happening. So in professional services, you have 0.8 hours per person per week that is increased since the sudden shift. And then you can also see where there may be some decreases. And so this is just, again, depending on your organization, depending on what you do as your business model, you may have an expectation of where, what the top organizations should be. If you're more of a sales organization and you see everything in here is your support organization, then there may be a problem with the products, or a lot of service or product calls versus sales calls, right? So it really depends on your organization whether these numbers look good or bad to you. The next one is all about employee engagement. So if you think about these trying times, I mean, it's been really hard the last 3 months. I have two elementary age children, where I had to homeschool them as well as work full time, as well as help customers through this crisis. And it's been a really, really trying time, I think, for everybody, with or without children, and et cetera. And so this is, I think, a really important indicator to understand, how are my people doing, and then this page focuses just on the last 2 weeks of the current time period that you're looking at, and compared to the last 2 weeks of the baseline period. So just to be aware, it's not the entire part. So what you're looking at here is that what you're seeing is 20% of employees had no manager one-on-one time in the last 2 weeks of the current time period. And the baseline shows us 32%. So how to read this is, in the baseline period where we were all, working quote unquote normal, 32% of employees had no manager one-on-one time. And now in the current time period, it's down to 20%. So the lower number is actually an indication of more manager one-on-one time, which in Microsoft's view is a good thing to do when you're in this really stressful situation. Managers need to be checking in on their people to make sure they're doing okay. As I said to you before, we have evidence that when managers check in with their people more frequently, not too much, but more frequently, that workloads are adjusted such that employees also don't feel as burned out, or don't feel like the impact is as disproportionate as it may have been. And so this also shows the breakdown of where the organizations are in terms of manager one-on-one time. And we also have links throughout here for the people who are looking at this for their own organization, different links to different studies and different evidence where we can, basically prove why these things matter and why somebody should look at these more closely for their own organization. The next one on the right side is one that I really love, which is talks about small group conversations. And so what that means is here it says 8% of employees with less than 2 hours per week in small group conversations in the last 2 weeks. So what this means is this is an indication of potential isolation. So if you look at here, and again here, a lower number is actually quote unquote better, meaning that there's less isolation happening. But if you look here, for example, the engineering team, 12% of that organization, 12% of those employees have had less than 2 hours of small group conversation in the last 2 weeks. And so small group conversation is something that we measure through Teams chats, unscheduled calls, and scheduled calls, but we are not pulling in email. So this is trying to be a proxy for those water cooler conversations, those coffee corner conversations that are no longer happening, and trying to create a proxy for that to say, are people still connecting in smaller groups? Are they still exchanging? Are they staying connected to the organization? And a takeaway for a leader here is to look at this and say, okay, if there is a possibility of isolation and my people are not having manager one-on-one time, what can I do as a leader to foster more connection? Do I do a virtual breakfast hour with my team? Do I do some sort of fun happy hour with my team? What are the things that I can do to ensure that all of my people stay connected while we're going through this very difficult time? And so again, here why it matters, feeling isolated has been shown to cause up to a 21% decline in employee performance. And so feeling connected also leads to better employee experience as well as performance. So super important ones here that I really value for employee engagement. The next one here is now that we've been sharing these insights with our customers for about 3 months now, we're now able to look at trends and how work patterns are evolving. So and we can also go back farther than just when the switch happened, the sudden shift. So what you're looking at here is the 4-week rolling average and then the weekly average. The rolling average is super important because that's that trend line. It tells us, if you remember all of the numbers I've shown you, we were tracking collaboration hours, the work week span, after hours, the manager one-on-one time, and the small group conversation. And so basically what you can see here is that, the collaboration hours are trending up right now. And the dips are, for example, certain holidays where nobody's working or much less work is happening. So that's why you see those dips. That's why that trend line is important to kind of normalize all of those numbers. But you see here kind of the trend line of collaboration hours. You see the trend line of the work week span and the after hours. And then the trend line of manager one-on-one time and small group conversation. Ideally, you want these numbers for the most part to kind of be trending down as people start to normalize in this new way of work. And so where the collaboration hours could be steady or maybe go down a bit. And so this is a good way and a good indicator for leaders, again, to look at over time how the organization is starting to quote unquote settle into this new normal. And then as employees start to shift back to going back to the office, a leader can then again look at these numbers to see how are things also shifting back, right? As people go back into the office, maybe not full time, but maybe part time, depending on the strategy that you decide on. The last two I'll show you are kind of the remote work effectiveness improvement areas. So really taking these insights to action. And we've grouped them here by opportunity area, giving you a number to orient yourself on. and then some best practice recommendations. So there's a lot of data on this slide and a lot of recommendations, so it might be a bit overwhelming when it's your own organization that you're looking at and how many recommendations you can go through. So what I usually tell customers is to really, I suggest that they go into just one opportunity area and start there and really dig in on that one particular opportunity, whichever one is the most important for your organization, and start with the best practices in that area. And then, bit by bit, see how that starts to make a difference in your organization. And so if you look at this one, for example, the work-life integration, I think this one speaks to me personally the most, how I'm affected by it and how our teams have been affected by it. And so here for work-life integration, we see here 17% of employees had a 2-hour or more increase in after hours activity. I absolutely fit into that, at least. And I really like one of the best practice recommendations, which is to create clear physical and temporal boundaries, communicate expectations for team working norms, and block up to 10 hours a week for uninterrupted time to focus on work using what we call the My Analytics Focus Plan. And so these are really actionable things as an individual, as well as a leader, you can do for your organization to really help in this work-life integration one. And so that's just one that I'll call out. Again, lots of different recommendations that we've given our customers that they can go through to help them really put these insights into action for the good of their organization, for that org resilience, for that business continuity. So those are the areas of improvement. And then we also have it in just kind of a table view in case the person who's working with this data wants to export it and share it with the organization. It's an kind of easy, digestible way to export this. And then of course, there's a glossary here that explains all of the different metrics that we were going through. But this just, I hope, gives you kind of I always believe in something that's called seeing is believing. So if I'm telling you about this really cool tool and solution that has all of these different data signals that we can extract a lot of insights from, I feel like it comes to life more if I just give you a demo. And so I hope that that demo helps you to understand what the insights are that we can extract at an aggregated level, as you saw, but really give you some actionable insights to help your organization to find those bright spots, as well as to find areas that really need some help and some improvement, so that your people can effectively, work better and really do their best work. So let me switch back, and while I switch back, I'm just going to again pause there to see if there are any questions. Just make sure I have the right screen showing. Okay. And here, I'll share the slides with you after the presentation, but basically everything that I just showed you in the live demo environment is also included in the deck that I'll send you, so that you have these screens again in a short explanation of what all of those data points were, and how you can interpret them, and as a leader, what are the things that you could really dive in on to help your organization. So with that, if you think about what we were talking about before with these, with these behavioral data sets and how this can help, like, really in this particular time that we're living in, help with navigating that shift to remote work, back to the office, maybe creating completely new working environments, a new normal. I wanted to start with that particular use case because it's very relevant to everybody in our working environments today. I did also want to show you a couple of examples of how else our companies, our customers are using workplace analytics to really help them drive more agility and to drive more cost savings and more efficiency into their organizations. And again, I'm a big believer of just showing you an example. And so one of the things that a lot of our customers use workplace analytics for is to improve process efficiency. And so one of the cool things we can do with workplace analytics is figure out, how expensive processes are. And I would love to hear from anybody on the call. Is there a process that drives you crazy inside of your company that you absolutely believe is very expensive, takes up too much of your time, and you're sure it takes up a lot of time from everybody else in your company? Is there one that anybody can think of, and just unmute yourself and share what that would be? Anything. Don't be shy. I have several, but I want to hear from you.
Sometimes it takes them a moment. Usually at the end, they come up with some questions.
Yeah, that's okay. It's no problem. It's no problem. I'll give you an example of a process I'm thinking of. One process is, expense reporting. I know that expense reporting is extremely time consuming for a lot of people, and a lot of people just really dislike doing that because it takes so much time, and sometimes the report gets declined and has to go back and you have to redo it, and it's just a very time consuming thing. Another one that is very uh, uh, bloated and time consuming, or could be, is what we call at Microsoft the quarterly business review. So I'm sure all of you have something similar in your businesses where you are reviewing the state of your business, whether that's at a weekly, quarterly, monthly cadence. And so inside of Microsoft, this process is called the quarterly business review, or QBR. And so what we're doing there is we basically say, okay, we go into workplace analytics and we put in a search term QBR, which stands for quarterly business review. And what happens is, you'll see here there's a machine learning driven word cloud that comes up with all of the things across all of these data signals that comes up that it thinks has to do with a QBR. And so what you do is you select QBR and you put it into included words. And as soon as you include this in your analysis, what you see down here is the meeting hours associated with that phrase, the meeting count, the email hours, and the email count. So 229,000 meetings related to QBR, and this is one instance of the QBR, right? So if you have 4 quarters of the year, this is one quarterly business review, right? So we're not looking at all 4, we're looking at one. So for that one QBR, there's 229,000 meeting hours, 88,000 meetings, 38,000 meeting hours, and 618,000 emails. That is massive. That is an extremely high amount of activity for one meeting that happens one time in a quarter for the duration of the meeting is about 4 hours. And so if you look at this and you calculate that by using a proxy of, let's say, $75 per hour per employee, this one QBR consumes 268,000 hours across 4 teams and costs $20 million. That is insane. But this data, this behavioral data insights will give you at least an idea of how expensive some of these processes could be inside of your organization that either you didn't know about, or again, that you had a hunch but didn't have the data to prove it. And so this is one of the really strong organizational agility cases that we've worked on with a customer, to be able to get to that, where the action out of that was, okay, which people absolutely need to be involved in this process, and cut out anybody else that does not need to be in it, and to ensure that the meeting times were shorter, the meeting cycles were shorter, and the number of emails were reduced, so effectively increasing the agility of the actual process. And I think I see some folks in the chat, so I just want to see if I
No,
can.
that's another question. They were asking something about the quality of the. If you could please stop your share screen and then continue again, reconnect. Maybe I think someone's having some issues of
Oh,
videoing.
sure. Yeah, sure. No problem. I'll do that. No problem at all. Thank you for
Oh,
flagging
yeah.
that. No
You just
problem.
reconnect one more time. Sometimes if they If anyone
Mm-hmm.
has any problems, just please press refresh, and then it should refresh your systems and hook back to the system where I think nobody else is showing some problems. The quality on our end is pretty good as well.
Okay, great, great.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, sure. So this is one example in the what I call organizational agility bucket of the things that we can address is these types of really long, bloated processes that cost companies a ton of money. Another example in the organizational agility topic is we worked with a CFO of a large financial services company who was concerned about, organizations basically coming to him and asking him for more headcount when he had the feeling or the hunch that this organization in particular did not need more headcount. He actually had a hunch that this organization was not fully utilized and therefore was not understanding why they were asking for more headcount. But he had no data to really prove it so that he could, in a data-driven way, push back on the requests and perhaps try to find a new solution. And so they used workplace analytics to be able to look across the organizations and this particular organization where all the requests were coming from. And what they found out is that that both collaboration time as well as focus time were very low for that particular organization, proving the hunch that that this organization was not completely utilized, and therefore the CFO had an argument to go back to that organization and say, hey, your folks are not fully utilized. Is there maybe a skill set mismatch, or is there something going on besides that where we can solve it in a different way versus just hiring more people? The other thing, though, that they discovered in looking at the organization's data is that they also uncovered organizations that were close to burnout. And so that is not something that they expected to see in the data because they weren't looking for that problem. But what they were able to do was they were able to look at this more underutilized organization and redistribute the workloads such that the organization that was close to burnout was their capacity was freed up by roughly 25%, so that now the CFO could, going forward, have more data-driven staffing decisions versus just relying on, anecdotal stories coming from these organizations. So this data can be very powerful, number one, to really help solve the problem in the right way, and number two, to maybe uncover things that that an organization was not even aware of, right? Like potential burnout. So that's one of again another example in the organizational agility bucket. If we think about employee experience, and I think that this is a lot of what we're talking about today is, how are our employees doing? How can we help them be more productive? How can we help them have a better employee experience? We know that over the years, we've spent as companies for our people, we have spent billions of dollars on employee experiences, but really to little effect. If you look at the numbers here, only 2 out of 10 executives report excellence at building a differentiated employee experience, even though there's been billions of dollars spent on all kinds of things like learning and development, wellness, and different measurements and recognition. And yet, for some reason, employees are still not as happy as we would hope that they would be. And 16% of workers, only 16% of workers are fully engaged. And that's a very scary number. And so as leaders, we need to understand, why is this happening? Why is it that only 16% of our employees are engaged? And the thing is that, the employee experience programs, they kind of overlook those daily moments. Like what we talked about in the very beginning is like, how do you measure all of those little tiny steps throughout the day that add up to the business outcomes that we create as companies, right? And so if you look at from an employee's lens, you can see here some of the things that may be going on through an employee's mind, like too many emails, unproductive meetings, micromanagement, stressful deadlines. All of these things play into, obviously, the employee experience. And some of these programs that employers are pushing out are not addressing those situations, and those are the reasons why people become unhappy and why they ultimately leave their employer for something else. And we know through data that ineffective employee experience programs destroy the value. And so it's kind of like a domino effect where, you know, when you have low engagement and high stress, you've got much higher absenteeism. So when people don't come to work, you have higher turnover, you have lower innovation because people don't have the room to be creative and innovative. There's lower customer satisfaction and ultimately lower profitability. And so we know through this data that our employees and their engagement and their experience are super, super important to the success of our organizations altogether. And if you look at it from, again, from kind of the employer perspective of what you're measuring to determine whether the employee experience is a good one or not, you know, companies can barely measure the employee experience. You know, in your company, it may be similar where you've got an onboarding interview, there's some engagement survey at some point, and then maybe there's an exit interview after somebody leaves, right? But, you know, you're not capturing all of the things that happen in between, right? Meeting the team, the one-on-one with the manager, the canceled one-on-ones, no focus time, multitasking, too many reoccurring meetings, right? All of these things that play into the employee's experience that are not being addressed by these big corporate, you know, programs. And so this is really an issue when you spend so much time and money recruiting, hopefully the right people, to only lose them because you're not able to see the entire experience from an employee perspective. And these behavioral data insights will allow you to see that at an aggregate level so that, again, you can address them at an aggregate and organizational level, and also maybe see organizations where things are working well, like I said, with bright spots, and then use those to apply to other parts of the organization. And so just one case study from one of the customers that we've worked with, the business challenge was really to prevent unnecessary attrition within the first year of an employee's experience. So we have found across a lot of companies that they'll hire really great talent, and then for whatever reason, that talent will leave the company within the first year. And a lot of customers want to understand why that is. And so there's something that we call early attrition, and we're able to use workplace analytics as well as joining the workplace analytics behavioral passive data set with an additional data set of survey results. Once you join these two data sets together, it's really powerful in the insights that you can see. The demos that I gave you before, those were purely workplace analytics metrics. So you can only imagine that when you start adding more data sets to this and join those data sets and overlay them, what additional insights and insights to action will come up. So what we found in working with customers is it's really, really interesting, and I hope that you take this with you the next time you hire somebody, is that within the first 90 days, employees who had a manager one-on-one time had a larger internal network and higher quality meetings versus those who did not have a manager one-on-one time. And so, and actually what we've found in our data and in our studies, everything is rooted in science for us, is that new hires who, it's really important to have that manager one-on-one within the first week. So not just within the first 90 days, of course, but within the first week, the likelihood that they had larger internal networks, that their meeting qualities were better, and that their contribution to the success of their team was higher, and also a score of wanting to stay at the company longer on company surveys was higher than those employees who did not have a one-on-one with their manager within the first week. Now, why is the internal network size important? The internal network size is important because we know, again, from data and from our studies, that the faster your network can grow and the larger it is, the more impactful and successful and a feeling of belonging you will have as an employee. We know this, for example, from our sales studies, that when a seller has a larger internal network, they are able to close more deals faster than sellers who do not have a large internal network. So internal networks are extremely important, as well as the impact that you have across a network over time is extremely important internally. Think about it. If you have strong internal network ties, you know people, they respect you, you're credible, they will move things through for you faster, you will be a priority to them, etc. There are reasons why the size and the centrality of the network are super important. And again, here, I mentioned it earlier, but as well in the first 90 days, that employees who had 20 or more hours of collaboration time with their team felt like, through the survey results, again, that joint data, felt like they contributed to the success of the overall team than those who did not have 20 or more hours of collaboration time with their team. And their intent to stay measure on the survey was 8% higher for those new hires. So really, it's super important to make sure that in hiring, good talent and onboarding that talent, that having that manager one-on-one time in the beginning in order to get that person connected to the people they need to be connected to, fostering and encouraging the person to network. I think a lot of times when people are onboarded, they're forced to do a lot of trainings and a lot of things that are very siloed and very individual, whereas we need to, just based on these studies, the recommendation that we give is to really encourage new hires to network and get to know people and build their network and build that credible network with everybody inside the company, so that they can feel like they're part of a team's success and they can feel like they're really making an impact very early on. And so those are the types of things. This is just one example in the employee experience bucket about employee onboarding, but there are all kinds of other employee-related studies that can be done with workplace analytics to help with the employee experience and with the culture transformation topics that a lot of companies are working through today, and definitely more so today because of this kind of forced, work transformation that we're going through right now. The last one that I'll touch on for you is in the customer focus bucket. So if you remember when I showed you the overview of workplace analytics, we have the organizational agility bucket, the employee experience bucket, and the customer focus bucket. And again, that fourth bucket of, what we call now org resilience, which is all things that we're talking about in this world today of, COVID and navigating the shift and all those things. So this last example I want to show you is about customer focus. And the things that we talk about in customer focus are, well, everything that has a customer focus. So if you think about, seller productivity, if you think about customer service functions and supplier and partner management, all of those things. And so the one customer example I'd like to give you is about sellers. And we worked with a Fortune 500 technology company. And the question that they had asked themselves was, why do I have these top performers? Why do I only have very few top performers? And what are they doing differently? Why are they able to sell so much more and close so many more deals compared to my sellers who are just not top performers? And when we looked at, we used workplace analytics and we joined that with their sales output data. So their, the sales attainment data for those sellers. Again, all aggregated so that we could just look at patterns. And what we were able to see was kind of 3 distinct behaviors. And so bright spots apparently. And so what we saw was that The top sales quota achievers, they spent more time with customers and prospects than others. In fact, 33% more hours with customers than the non-top performers. They maintained a larger internal network. I mentioned that just a minute ago, how important internal networks are. 25% larger internal network than folks who are not top performers, and 25% more hours with management. So internal management attention. And this is super interesting insights, because the internal network one kind of surprised me until I thought about it more. You know, if you have really strong ties with, you know, the contracting organization, the price negotiation, the business desk, or whatever it's called inside of your organization, you know, that makes sense that you would be able to, you know, be more successful and close more deals when you have that credibility and that network size. And so these are the findings of what the workplace analytics data told us about this particular customer's data set. And with that, the customer decided, okay, we need to make some changes. And so in addition to the workplace analytics analysis that we gave them, the leadership used this new behavioral data to redesign sales territories so that these sellers could have more time with their customers and prospects, they could get more time with their internal management, and really push on those two initial insights, as well as doing different leadership engagement and community fostering things to build their internal networks as well. In addition to doing that, just, you know, resetting up the sales territories and allowing more time with customers and internal management, the team also set up a personalized email for every seller to show them kind of, hey, this is your behavior. Like, for example, you're spending this much time with this customer, but, you know, this customer has more potential and you're not spending as much time here. Maybe you should look at spending more time with this customer. Or you only have, you know, 3 customer contacts at this account. Maybe you need to increase that to 6, because we know that, for example, 6 is a minimum in order to really be deep into the account. And so a personalized email to the seller with different insights so that the seller can then start to change his or her behavior. So that's those field rep dashboards, as well as manager dashboards, to be able to show the managers at an aggregate level how their sellers are now performing with all of these new changes in place. And so the punchline is, with the changes that the management made, including these, you know, what we call nudges, so these reminders of how to change your behavior for better success. In the 9 months that followed these changes, 29% of the field reps adopted this new sales framework and these new habits, these new behaviors. And those 29% of those reps, so that 29%, they achieved 130% quota attainment versus 70% attainment from those who did not adopt those new behaviors. So if you think about it, just 29% of the sales force adopted these behaviors, and that yielded $237 million in revenue growth in just 9 months, which is 10% of the overall top line growth for this company. This is a massive, massive impact of just 29% of the sales force. And this is due to having that overlay of workplace analytics, behavioral data, coupled with sales attainment data to be able to surface the insights and give really these bright spots back to the leadership to make those changes. Because if you ask people what they're doing differently, why they're being successful, or, you know, why they feel balanced, or why their work-life integration works, they may not be able to articulate for you how it all is working well. But if you look at the passive data, that will give you more of that comprehensive view. So a person may be able to tell you, yeah, I'm a great seller because of this and this, but they may not be able to tell you the whole story, just because it's not It's not conscious to them what they're doing differently. But the passive data signals can help us understand that for better change. And actually, this particular customer example sparked Microsoft's own sales transformation. And so we did our own transformation, and we found very similarly to our customer that networks matter. Networks are really, really important for us to be successful as a company, and specifically for our sales force to be successful. We also found that, you know, our sales managers at Microsoft were super internally focused versus spending more time with their people and with customers. So this rhythm of business, this rhythm of business, spending 27% of their time, it's essentially internal meetings talking about the business, talking about sales, versus actually being with the people and being with customers and working on the sales, right? And so after the changes that we made as a company, based on the data that we saw, we were able to reduce a lot of this internal meetings about the business and put more time into the people. And thus, customer escalations went down as a result. Forecasting time went down as a result because the managers were connected more to their people. Strategy time went up because we were able to free up time for these managers to think about strategy and future versus daily business, rhythm of business, quarterly business review, et cetera, type of things. Learning and readiness time went up because we also created that space by reducing time here. And so with these changes, we were able to make a few points difference in all of these areas so that our managers could focus on the things that matter most to our customers, which is working with them and making sure that they're happy. And again, like I was telling you before, just briefly, is that we were also able to look at, you know, where we are spending too much time on customer accounts versus not enough time, and striking that balance in a better way so that we could serve our customers better. And these are also the insights, again, that we found as a company. Now, we also created our own seller insights email, just the same thing that we did with our customer, so that each seller would have insight into time they have with their customers, and the relationships that they have internally, and what they can do to maximize all of that orchestration. And so our sellers get a similar email where it shows them how much time they're spending externally versus internally, how they compare that to their peer group, and to really make sure that they're spending their time on the right things, so they're also not getting bogged down with internal meetings and internal processes where they should be out there serving our customers. And here, this is what I was alluding to, that, you know, that we have this type of chart where we can see, you know, where people are spending their time with which accounts. So for example, this particular seller is spending a lot of time with Alpine Ski House, where a lot of email and meeting and calendar time, where the yield, the addressable market, may be higher with other accounts. And so there's these tips in here to, you know, spend more time with these other places. There's also tips in here to say, hey, you know, you've lost contact with, you know, several customers, go back in and maybe, you know, revive that contact, use LinkedIn Sales Navigator, etc. And then these are the roles that you work with internally. So again, looking at that internal network of people and just surfacing insights like, hey, you haven't talked to an enterprise channel manager in the last 4 weeks, even though I know that you usually talk to them, right? The machine learning knows which connections you have, and just kind of nudging on that and saying, hey, you may need to go talk to that person to, you know, be successful in a certain way. And so that is kind of just a quick, you know, example of really the insights to action to make sure that it's a really nice virtuous circle of figuring out where there are bright spots or areas of opportunity, putting together the change, and then measuring the change before, during, and after to ensure that you're really getting closer to those all up initiatives that you're trying to achieve. So I'll pause there. We have 10 minutes left, and I just want to make sure that that we have time for questions, should you have any.
Oh yeah, we definitely have time. Don't worry about that.
Okay. That is great. I just want to make sure I'm on track here. We have until 11 o'clock, right? Just
You can spend more time even after that because we have usually a wrap up with questionnaire afterwards. So you have plenty of
okay.
time. Feel
I
free.
I unfortunately I have a hard stop, and so that's why I just want to double
Oh,
check.
no worries then.
But
No, we'll give you time to ask questions then.
okay, okay, great. Yeah. So one last thing I'll share with you while you kind of think of if there are any questions that you have. You know, a lot of times uh, customers, the first thing they think of is, you know, trust and privacy and all of these things. And one thing that I'll just share is that, you know, we as being part of Microsoft and the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, you know, we comply, of course, with workplace analytics with all of the other very stringent trust and compliance and safeguards that are in place. All views are de-identified and aggregated. But having said that, you know, the data is the customer's data, and the customer can choose to do what they want with it. We have strong recommendations, and we have privacy controls that are built into the solution, so that so that by default the data is not identifiable, and so it's privacy by design, built-in security, but it's your data, you own it, you control it. You're the data controller, we are the processor. And with that, we have workplace analytics compliance with GDPR, as well as many other certifications and abiding by all the local and country and regional laws that Microsoft abides by anyway. So, so that's what I have for you. That's my email address. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I know this was a lot of information and a lot of data points, but I feel like there's so much power in this data to help people drive their business in a very data-driven way that I get really excited to talk about it. Go to insights.office.com. There are several more customer examples, as well as a lot of research. We do several papers with Harvard Business Review. So lots of really good, interesting things there that you can follow up on. And like I said, I'll be definitely sending this deck over to you so you can have it. So with that,